Every spotlight casts a shadow, and in Hollywood's golden era, those shadows fell directly onto the children. We reveal how stars like Judy Garland and Joe Jackson turned family life into a terrifying stage of perfection, fear, and ultimate betrayal. The Wire Hanger and the Queen, Joan Crawford's reign. Behind the silver glow of Hollywood's golden era, a darker drama played out far from the studio cameras. Joan Crawford, the formidable leading lady, crafted an on-screen image of immaculate poise. Yet, inside her Beverly Hills mansion, this pursuit of flawlessness turned a mother's devotion into a tyrant's reign, creating a climate of terror for the children who only craved her affection. Joan Crawford was one of the most transformative figures in cinema history. Born Lucille Le Sueur into grinding poverty, her drive was defined by a hunger for success. Once she achieved stardom, she became obsessed with control of her image, her career, and most tragically, her family. In the 1940s, when she adopted 4 children, she appeared to the world as the picture of selfless Hollywood motherhood. But her daughter, Christina, would later reveal that life in the mansion was less a sanctuary and more a stage for her mother's frustrations. There were no tender goodnights, only a constant, breathless performance of obedience. Crawford demanded absolute adherence to her impossible standards. She would enforce order and discipline with a terrifying, unpredictable rage, erupting over infractions as minor as a smudge, or, in one infamous instance, the sight of a garment resting on a wire hanger. The hanger became a symbol of a deep, domestic fury, a sudden explosion that left a child trembling with fear. Christina described her childhood as living in a perpetual state of performance. For Crawford, image was everything. This relentless drive for perfection was a twisted reflection of the star's own climb out of poverty and hardship. She could not tolerate weakness or slovenliness. The children were extensions of her flawless public image. To fall short was to invite the sudden withdrawal of her approval and affection. Which Hollywood idol's secret surprised you most? Share your thoughts below. When the memoir detailing this private family trauma was made public in 1978, it sent shockwaves through the industry. The public who adored the poised, flawless screen legend were stunned by the portrait of the tyrant behind the closed doors. Crawford remained convinced that she had acted properly in the public eye, but her children carried the painful truth. The legacy of her on-screen brilliance would forever be shadowed by the tragic story of the children who felt her fury. A devastating reminder that fame cannot teach tenderness. The deep emotional coldness of stardom was not exclusive to formidable leading ladies. Next, we will examine the beloved voice of Christmas, whose warmth comforted millions, yet whose own sons described a life of strict discipline, enforced by a father with a heart of ice. The crooner's frost, Bing Crosby's heart of ice. To millions around the world, his voice was the sound of comfort, a warm, timeless velvet. Bing Crosby, the undisputed king of radio and film, was the gentle spirit who sang of white Christmases. Yet, the warmth he projected on screen stood in chilling contrast to the emotional coldness his own sons experienced behind closed doors. Crosby's path to success was marked by intense focus. He achieved fame by selling an image of easygoing masculinity. But his sons, particularly the eldest, Gary Crosby, later chronicled a life lived under a regime of excessive strictness and absolute emotional control, revealing a father who demanded perfection and offered very little tenderness. Gary later described him, in chilling contrast to the public image, as a tyrant with a heart of ice. In the Crosby home, there were no allowances for childlike vulnerability. The king of croon demanded good grades, immaculate manners, and above all, emotional suppression. His children were told that any display of feeling was a sign of weakness, a philosophy that created a perpetual emotional barrier between father and sons. For a man who brought so much comfort to the world, Bing Crosby could not generate any for the boys who bore his name. He sought to mold his sons into perfect extensions of his flawless public image, forgetting that children require nurture, not just discipline. This profound distance and the pressure left lasting wounds. In a heartbreaking turn that echoed the severity of their upbringing, two of Crosby's sons later ended their lives prematurely. Their tragedy served as a harrowing final testament to the destructive power of emotional neglect, proving that fame and immense public success cannot substitute for genuine parental love. The voice that soothed millions could not quiet the inner turmoil of his own family. Bing Crosby's story is a profound reminder that the shadows of stardom often linger. The silence of the emotionally absent father takes many forms. Next, we turn to another American screen icon, Henry Fonda, whose children grew up longing for the warmth of a man who could discuss politics for hours, but could never manage to ask, "How do you feel?" The silence of the American hero, Henry Fonda's absent heart. On screen, he was the embodiment of the stoic American hero, noble, calm, and effortlessly righteous. Henry Fonda's face projected an indelible sense of moral authority and quiet strength. Yet, the emotional control that served his art so perfectly became an impenetrable shield at home, rendering the great actor profoundly distant from the children who longed for his warmth. Fonda achieved his legendary status through discipline. While he could brilliantly portray a father fighting for his family on screen, the man himself was incapable of accessing simple tenderness in his private life. His children, Jane and Peter Fonda, grew up in the shadow of this emotional frost, constantly navigating the space around a man who was physically present but wholly absent in spirit. Jane Fonda often spoke publicly about the profound silence that defined their relationship. She recalled that her father could engage in lengthy, passionate discussions, but he could never bring himself to ask the fundamental question of fatherhood: how do you feel? His inability to express vulnerability left his children in a perpetual state of longing, searching for approval. For Jane, this emotional hunger fueled her own ambitious career. She entered the performing world, unconsciously performing for her father, hoping her success might finally break through his armor. But the approval remained elusive, and the silence lingered for decades. It was a tragedy of wasted years, spent chasing an emotional connection that was never freely given. Henry Fonda's tragedy wasn't one of overt cruelty, but one of emotional neglect. It was the passive, freezing kind of rejection that left children feeling invalidated and unseen. His inability to connect came not from malice, but from a personal armor built over years, a wall that kept the world and his family at a safe, professional distance. It was only in his twilight years that the armor finally began to peel away. Age and infirmity allowed a brief, delicate thawing between him and his daughter. But for the majority of their lives, the emotional distance was permanent, a lasting reminder that one can be an icon to millions and yet remain a mystery to one's own blood. The cost of stardom often began not with the children themselves, but with the unrelenting ambitions of their parents. In our next story, we look at the mother who helped create the magic of Judy Garland, but who, in the process, demanded the ultimate price, the complete destruction of her daughter's innocence. The Price of Emerald City, Judy Garland's stolen innocence. She was the voice of a generation, a rare talent who carried the dreams of an entire nation, transforming the screen into pure, luminous magic. Judy Garland, the star who walked the yellow brick road to fame, would pay a price that was both devastating and irreversible. Her tragedy began not in Hollywood's cruel system, but in the relentless, unwavering ambition of the woman who should have protected her, her mother, Ethel Gum. Before she was a global legend, Judy was simply Frances Gum, a girl with an extraordinary voice and a mother who saw her potential, not as a gift to be nurtured, but as a business to be exploited. Ethel Gum was the archetype of the stage mother, fiercely determined and terrifyingly blind to the needs of her child. For Ethel, there was no pause in the pursuit of success. Frances was pushed to perform endlessly, often when exhausted or ill. The grueling schedule demanded energy beyond a child's capacity, and it was Ethel, the supposed guardian, who facilitated her daughter's undoing. When Judy was only 13, she was already being administered amphetamines by the studio. This was done with her mother's full awareness and consent. The rationale was simple and chilling. One type of stimulant was given to keep her awake and performing. A subsequent type of sedative was then given to help her sleep and prepare for the next day's work. The two together created a punishing chemical rhythm that systematically destroyed her metabolism. Ethel Gum did not see a vulnerable child. She saw a rising star, a financial lifeline, and the ultimate realization of her own failed aspirations. This system of control, facilitated by her mother's drive, set Judy on a path of dependence and turmoil that would define her entire life. Years later, reflecting on the shattering of her youth, Judy made one of the most haunting confessions in the history of the Golden Age. "My mother only loved me when I was working." It is a heartbreaking statement that encapsulates the core tragedy. A little girl who learned that her value was measured only by her output, not by her intrinsic worth. The childhood stolen by Ethel Gum's relentless ambition was replaced by a relentless spotlight. The cost of admission to the Emerald City was Judy's own peace. Her story is the harrowing proof that the price of fame can be measured in sleepless nights and a profound sense of abandonment. The shadow cast by an ambitious parent takes many forms. Next, we explore the glamorous world of the 1970s, where a charismatic father saw his daughter not as a beloved child, but as a professional rival who needed to be cut down to size. The charmer and the rival, Ryan O'Neal's battle for the spotlight. In the 1970s, Ryan O'Neal was Hollywood's golden boy, handsome, charismatic, and adored. Yet, the same intense desire for the spotlight that propelled his career turned his family life into an emotional battlefield, particularly in his relationship with his daughter, Tatum O'Neal. The O'Neals created one of cinema's most charming father-daughter pairings in the 1973 film Paper Moon. 10-year-old Tatum became the youngest person ever to win an Academy Award for competitive acting. Off-screen, the glow of the spotlights created not a bond, but a painful rivalry. Ryan O'Neal, a man constantly hungry for attention, seemed incapable of celebrating his daughter's success without feeling overshadowed by it. Tatum later spoke of a painful dynamic where her father saw her not as a beloved child, but as a professional competitor. Instead of offering support, he inflicted a subtle, corrosive cruelty, making fun of her and diminishing her accomplishments. The very traits that made him a magnetic screen presence, his wit, his confidence, his focus on the self, became weapons at home. He struggled to reconcile his own need to be the center of attention with the reality that his young daughter was suddenly outshining him. She felt unwanted, small, and constantly judged. This environment of emotional invalidation taught Tatum that love was conditional and that her own success was a threat to her father's affection. The relationship was fractured for decades, standing as a stark reminder that charisma and cruelty can tragically reside within the same heart. The struggle for reconciliation, later in life, proved incredibly difficult. The pain of growing up as a rival left an indelible mark. The decades of emotional distance became an almost impossible chasm to cross, serving as a poignant illustration of the cost when fame completely consumes a father's ability to genuinely love. The ambition that devours family life often begins with a parent's own lost dream. In our next story, we look at the mother of the glamorous Lana Turner, whose fierce determination to escape poverty turned her young daughter into a product before she even learned who she was. The Sweater Girl's product, Lana Turner and the mother's ambition. She was the iconic sweater girl, a vision of effortless glamour. Lana Turner's swift rise to stardom was a calculated, desperate escape, engineered by her mother, Mildred. This determined woman saw her daughter not just as a beauty, but as the only viable product that could deliver them both from the grinding realities of the Great Depression. Mildred Turner was a single mother scraping by, haunted by the memory of her husband's untimely passing and struggling against harsh financial circumstances. This created a cold, visceral fear of returning to poverty that fueled her every decision. Stardom was not Lana's dream. It was Mildred's blueprint for salvation. She moved her daughter to Hollywood and began the meticulous process of molding her into a professional commodity. Mildred's ambition was so relentless that she became tragically blind to the fundamental needs of a teenager. Lana was thrust into an adult world far too soon. At the tender age of 16, she was already being escorted to parties and social gatherings that were wildly inappropriate for her years. Her mother stood nearby, proud of the spectacle, but utterly failing in her duty to protect the child from the dangers of the unprincipled industry. Lana Turner would later reflect on this period with quiet sadness, stating simply that she never truly had a childhood, only a career. Her mother's desperate drive had objectified her, turning the young girl into a glamorous, profitable image before she ever had the chance to understand her own personhood. The sudden, immense fame granted her wealth and status, but it robbed her of the fundamental experience of safety and unconditional love. This early environment of emotional compromise had devastating long-term effects. As scandals later tore through Lana's adult life, her tumultuous affairs and heartbreaks, she admitted a quiet, sorrowful truth. She never truly learned what love really looked like. The foundation of her life had been built on ambition, not affection. Lana Turner's dazzling exterior concealed the painful truth of a girl rushed into womanhood by a mother's dream. But the manipulation of a star's career is a tragically repeating theme. We turn now to Tippi Hedren, who, having been shaped and then mistreated by a great director, attempted to direct her own daughter's pain into a similar, dangerous dream. Hitchcock's Muse and the Dangerous Dream, Tippi Hedren's Control. Tippi Hedren was the epitome of icy, untouchable beauty, Alfred Hitchcock's golden-haired muse. Yet, behind the flawless facade lay the bitterness of a promising career that had been tragically curtailed. Tippi's unfulfilled dreams created a profound shadow that fell directly onto her daughter, Melanie Griffith. Tippi Hedren's relationship with Hollywood was notoriously complicated. She had a very difficult time with the pressures of the studio system. Having lost control over her own destiny, Tippi seemed determined to exercise absolute authority over her daughters. Melanie Griffith was meant to succeed where Tippi felt she had failed. This transference of ambition created a highly volatile, controlling environment. When Melanie attempted to forge her own path, the tension between mother and daughter turned toxic. Tippi's desire to direct her daughter's life became a form of emotional containment. This control reached its peak when Tippi decided she would manage every facet of Melanie's domestic life. In an attempt to keep Melanie close, while still allowing her access to the entertainment world, Tippi made choices that later shocked the public. At the tender age of 14, Melanie was already exposed to the adult, demanding world of Hollywood parties. The most controversial decision, the shocking pinnacle of her managerial control, was Tippi allowing the teenager to live with adult actors, including the man who would become her first husband, Don Johnson. Tippi Hedren later asserted that her intention was to protect her daughter. However, the outcome was precisely the opposite. Melanie grew up too fast, learning to navigate love and intimacy through chaos and precocious independence. The family bond was consumed by the endless need to maintain the image of success. The stage mother's unrelenting ambition is only one form of parental tragedy. We turn now to a subtle but equally damaging failure. The father whose emotional absence shaped his son's entire persona, leaving the great actor with the haunting inheritance of silence. We speak of Anthony Perkins, the man who could never escape the ghost of his own father. The inheritance of silence. Anthony Perkins, the ghost father. To generations of film lovers, Anthony Perkins is eternally defined by the quiet, fragile intensity of Norman Bates. Yet, the tragedy of Perkins's performance was its unsettling closeness to his own reality, an isolation inherited directly from his own father. Perkins's father, Osgood Perkins, was a distinguished Broadway actor who passed away when Anthony was only 5 years old. However, even in life, Osgood had been an emotionally distant man. The younger Perkins grew up surrounded by a vacuum of warmth and a silence that spoke volumes. This early, powerful wound shaped Anthony Perkins into the quiet, anxious, and deeply private man Hollywood exploited for his vulnerability. He brought genuine, heartbreaking isolation to his most famous roles. When Anthony Perkins became a father himself, the tragic pattern of inheritance reasserted itself. Despite his genuine affection for his sons, the emotional scaffolding he had built in response to his own pain made intimacy terrifying. He remained secretive, fearful of connection, and ultimately, emotionally unreachable. The irony was devastating. A public figure who maintained such a desperate need for privacy that he could not achieve a private relationship with his own children. His sons would later reflect that they barely knew the man behind the famous anxious eyes. The tragedy of Anthony Perkins is a sorrowful study in legacy. His father's neglect was passed down, a burden carried by the next generation. It proves that the most devastating forms of cruelty are not always active. Sometimes they are passive, silent, and persistent. The emotional trauma was simply reinforced. The golden light of stardom often creates environments where children are emotionally starved. While some parents withdraw affection, others are consumed by a towering ambition that obliterates all else. In our next story, we return to the archetype of the monstrous stage parent, revealing the terrifying drive of Rose Hovick, the real-life figure whose family dubbed her Mama Dearest, long before the world ever heard of Joan Crawford. The monster behind the legend, Rose Hovick's vaudeville tyranny. She is a figure immortalized on the Broadway stage, Mama Rose, the quintessential, terrifying stage mother. Yet Rose Hovick was a real woman, a driving, manipulative force whose ferocious will turned her daughters, the future vaudeville stars, June Havoc and Gypsy Rose Lee, into soldiers in her desperate war for success. Rose Hovick was a woman obsessed with the glow of the spotlight. Instead, she lived vicariously through her talented children. She was a force of nature who allowed no obstacle to stand in the way of her daughter's ascent. Her reign of terror set the early blueprint for the abusive stage parent. The home Rose created was a constant training ground. Her daughters endured endless rehearsals and sleepless nights, driven by their mother's unwavering belief that success justified any means. Rose Hovick became a master manipulator, using schemes, screams, and relentless pressure to keep her girls performing. This was a family dynamic so volatile and extreme that the daughters themselves referred to their mother as Mama Dearest decades before the rest of the world learned of Joan Crawford's private terrors. Rose's obsession with control went far beyond typical demands. Rose Hovick's ambition ultimately destroyed the family structure. Her daughters found their only path to peace was complete escape. They both left, but the emotional scars inflicted by their mother's tyranny proved to be permanent. Rose ended her days largely estranged from the very children she had sacrificed everything to promote. The character of Mama Rose became a legendary symbol of the parent who exploits their child for personal glory. It is a chilling portrait of how the hunger for the spotlight can completely obliterate the capacity for love and nurture. The ambition that devours a family's peace takes on yet another dimension. Next, we look at the eternal showman, Mickey Rooney, whose comic energy lit up the screen, but whose massive family found that their father's devotion belonged to the world, not to them. The showman who vanished, Mickey Rooney's empty home. He was the eternal showman, a bundle of frantic comic energy, and a boy wonder who had charmed the nation. Mickey Rooney's infectious smile and boundless charisma defined a lifelong career. But the spotlight that illuminated his genius also cast a deep, sorrowful shadow over his private life. Mickey Rooney's life was an ongoing performance, a relentless pursuit of applause that left no room for the quiet work of fatherhood. His personal life was marked by instability. He married 8 times and fathered 9 children across his many unions. This constant change created domestic chaos, meaning the children never knew stability. The show always came first. His children, who lived in the wake of his massive fame, recall a man who was emotionally absent. His daughter, Kelly, once encapsulated the tragedy. "My father loved the world, but he didn't love us." It was a devastating indictment of a man whose need for external validation consumed any capacity for genuine affection. Rooney's comic genius stemmed from a desperate, ongoing need for attention. Yet, the price of that insatiable hunger was the peace of his home. He left behind an undeniable legacy of fame. But for his family, he left behind an emotional emptiness. His story is a poignant demonstration that immense professional success and unconditional love rarely share the same home. The emotional cruelty of stardom is often rooted in distance and neglect. The great comedian's silence. Charlie Chaplin, the ruler. He was the single greatest artist of the silent screen, a global genius whose creation, The Little Tramp, made millions laugh. Charlie Chaplin's comedic brilliance was born of early poverty, forging in him an obsessive need for control that permeated every frame of his films. But tragically, that same relentless perfectionism followed him home, and in his own mansion, the laughter often stopped. Chaplin's fame and financial success offered him security. He built a sprawling family with his wife, Una O'Neill, but the home he created felt less like a warm sanctuary and more like a precisely managed studio set. The discipline and command he wielded on set were transposed directly onto his children. Life in the Chaplin home was often characterized by silence and obedience. The famous comedian was, at home, a ruler, a figure who controlled every minute detail of his children's existence. His authority extended to mandating silent, formal meal times. His expectations were immense, his temper capable of freezing a room. Some of his children revered their father's genius. Yet, for all of them, there was the constant, heavy weight of being raised by a legend whose artistic persona was simply too large to allow for simple, unconditional love. His eldest son, Charles Chaplin Jr., once shared a quiet, sorrowful observation. "He belonged to the world, not to us." That single sentence serves as a heartbreaking epitaph for Chaplin's personal life. The man who could charm the globe struggled profoundly to perform the quiet duty of fatherhood. Next, we travel to the world of swashbuckling adventure to examine Errol Flynn, whose charisma and laughing rebel persona masked a corrosive cruelty, a man who found pleasure in belittling his own blood. The rogue who couldn't connect. Errol Flynn's emotional flight. He was the swashbuckling king of the screen, a dashing adventurer. Errol Flynn seemed to embody a life lived without consequence. But beneath the veneer of roguish charm lay a deep, corrosive emotional cruelty that he inflicted upon his children. Flynn's public persona was one of reckless abandonment. Yet, the same arrogance that made him adored by millions made him utterly unreachable as a father. His daughter, Deirdre Flynn, later recounted that her father was defined by sarcasm and emotional distance, a man who found a perverse, unsettling pleasure in belittling those closest to him. This was a cooler, more calculating form of emotional abuse. Flynn would make fun of his children's looks or intelligence, and if they showed sadness or tears, he would simply laugh. This was a deliberate, cold experiment in emotional extinction, a calculated invalidation that taught his children their feelings were unimportant. Flynn's behavior stemmed from a profound inability to engage in genuine intimacy. His ambition was to remain eternally the carefree adolescent hero, a fantasy that precluded the commitments of fatherhood. The dark legacy of his emotional neglect was underscored by the fate of his son, Sean Flynn. Sean vanished in Cambodia while covering the Vietnam conflict. Though Errol had passed away years before, his long-term neglect lingered like a familial curse, a permanent emptiness in the lives of his remaining children. Errol Flynn's story is a poignant testament to the fact that charisma without empathy can render a parent tragically incapable of love. The Secret That Stole a Childhood, Loretta Young, and Clark Gable. This is one of Hollywood's darkest secrets, a story of silence and conspiracy orchestrated to protect two of the greatest careers in cinema. The consequences of a scandal could be catastrophic, forcing Clark Gable and Loretta Young into a desperate deception. The year was 1935. Gable and Young were filming The Call of the Wild. Both were married. The connection led to a profound personal indiscretion. Soon after, Loretta Young realized she was expecting a child with the married star. The revelation threatened to ignite a scandal that could have completely destroyed both their carefully constructed careers. Young was a Catholic star. Gable was a colossal figure. The studio system and Loretta's own family immediately conspired to construct an elaborate, cold-blooded lie. Loretta Young vanished from Hollywood, traveling abroad under the pretense of illness. When the baby, a daughter named Judy, was born, the fiction was continued. Young returned months later and orchestrated a new pretense, announcing that she had adopted the child. In reality, she was presenting her own daughter as an outsider, a little girl who was raised under the perpetual shadow of a calculated deception. Judy Lewis grew up knowing something was profoundly untrue. She sensed the distance in her mother's affection, felt the absence of a father, and noticed the undeniable resemblance, especially the signature dimpled chin, that linked her to the man the world knew as Clark Gable. It was the silent, genetic witness to the great lie. She was a living secret, a truth that was constantly suppressed for the sake of her parents' fame. Judy Lewis did not learn the true identity of her famous father until she was an adult. The revelation confirmed the unspoken reality that had shadowed her entire life. She later encapsulated the emotional devastation with a simple, painful statement. "I was the secret that shouldn't have existed." This tragedy stands as a powerful testament to the cold mechanics of the Golden Age. Hollywood could turn a simple birth into a scandal that needed to be completely erased. The cost of this emotional fraud extended beyond the silver screen. Our next story delves into one of the most disturbing events in modern music history, where a father's controlling rage clashed with his son's genius, resulting in a horrific family tragedy. We examine the story of Marvin Gaye and the preacher who gave him his name. When faith turned to fury, Marvin Gaye, Sr.'s dark legacy. His voice possessed a singular ability to transcend genre, a velvet tenor that could heal a broken heart. Marvin Gaye was a musical icon whose talent was a pure, transcendent gift. Yet, the man who gave him his name Marvin Gaye Sr. was a preacher whose religious fervor became dangerously intertwined with control and rage, creating a domestic environment of fear and emotional torment. Marvin Gaye Sr. was a minister, a man who preached the word of God's love, but who, at home, ruled his family with an unquestionable iron fist. His religious strictness and obsessive need for control morphed into a destructive pattern of anger and physical intimidation. Marvin Jr. grew up terrified, enduring constant emotional humiliation and physical punishment in a household where religion was tragically mixed with violence. As the younger Marvin Gaye achieved worldwide fame, his father's resentment and control only intensified. Marvin Sr. despised his son's music, viewing the secular themes of love and passion as sinful and unworthy. This resentment created a permanent, volatile clash between the artist's boundless, beautiful self-expression and the preacher's narrow, destructive fundamentalism. The long-simmering domestic tension was unbearable. The atmosphere was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The tension came to a sudden, devastating climax in 1984, the day before Marvin Gaye Jr.'s 45th birthday. During a heated family argument, Marvin Gaye Sr. shot and instantly ended the life of his son. The man who preached God's love had taken the life of his own child. The incident remains one of the most disturbing and sorrowful events in music history. When questioned about the act, the father's response was chillingly devoid of remorse. This horrific family tragedy offered the final, devastating proof that for some parents, the deep-seated inability to love can become a destructive, terrifying force. The tragedy of Marvin Gaye Jr. is a profound reminder that fame and genius offer no insulation from domestic terror. His life, filled with music that sought to unite and comfort, was ultimately ended by the very person who was meant to be his anchor and protector. This story of controlling rage contrasts with another musical empire where control was simply translated into a ruthless business model. Next, we examine the empire built by Joe Jackson, the man whose unparalleled ambition turned his children into global legends but utterly destroyed their peace. The general of pop, Joe Jackson's discipline without love. He was the architect of a global musical dynasty, the man who saw raw potential in his children and molded them into the legendary Jackson 5, a phenomenon that defined the sound of the late 1960s. Joe Jackson was, to the world, a visionary father who discovered Michael Jackson. But for his own family, he was a figure of unyielding authority, whose immense ambition turned their childhood into a ruthless military campaign. Joe Jackson had grown up in the challenging environment of the 1940s, harboring the bitter taste of his own failed musical dreams. When he recognized the extraordinary talent in his sons, he saw a business opportunity, an escape route from poverty. His method for building this empire was terrifying, relentless, militaristic discipline. He treated his sons not as artists or children, but as soldiers in a perpetual state of readiness. Rehearsals were demanded at all hours, often waking the boys in the dead of night, forcing them to perform until they reached the point of exhaustion. A missed note or a wrong step was met with harsh physical punishment and cutting insults. The children learned to anticipate the sound of their father's footsteps and the belt being unbuckled, a constant symbol of their terror. Joe Jackson told the press that he was simply instilling discipline. But discipline, when administered without the grounding warmth of love, becomes a form of abuse. The children learned that their father's approval was conditional. Even after his children ascended to global icon status, they still found themselves trembling when he called. Michael Jackson, the son whose artistry would define a generation, spent his entire adult life publicly grappling with the profound emotional damage wrought by his father's methods. His own songs, his lifelong loneliness, and his constant search for the innocent childhood that was stolen spoke louder than any verbal accusation. His fame was vast, but simple peace remained perpetually out of reach. Joe Jackson's single-minded pursuit of stardom made legends, but he destroyed the emotional peace of every soul he touched. This story is a chilling reminder of the catastrophic consequences when personal ambition completely eclipses parental duty. The wounds inflicted by a demanding parent can tragically echo through generations. We now return to one of Hollywood's most tragic figures, Judy Garland, who, in her own desperate pain, became a broken reflection of the mother she hated. The victim becomes the victimizer, Judy Garland's faded echo. Judy Garland, the beloved star whose luminous talent was tragically overshadowed by her pain, had vowed she would never become the person who caused so much pain to her own mother, Ethel Gum. Yet the tragedy of generational trauma is its relentless echoing. In her own desperate struggle, Judy Garland became a broken reflection of the very parent she despised. When Judy became a mother to Liza Minnelli, Lorna, and Joey Luft, her love for them was fierce and profound. But Judy was not merely a mother. She was a woman drowning. Haunted by the addiction fostered in her youth, crushed by studio pressures, and desperately seeking the affection she never received, she was frequently unreliable, fragile, and often frightening to the very children she cherished. The cycle of pain proved impossible to break. Judy's emotional life was a series of dramatic, sweeping highs and lows. The constant burden of being the child of a damaged icon was immeasurable. Her daughter, Liza, who loved her deeply, understood this terrifying duality. Liza once described her mother's moods. "When she was up, it was heaven," Liza recalled. "When she was down, the whole house went dark." Judy Garland was not cruel by deliberate choice. She was fundamentally a victim first, a sensitive soul broken by the same brutal system that Ethel Gum helped create. Her actions were not the result of malicious intent, but of a deep psychological devastation that prevented her from providing the emotional safety her children needed. Her motherhood was a desperate balancing act. Her story reminds us that tragedy in Hollywood does not always originate from outright monsters. Sometimes it comes from people who were once grievously wounded children themselves. The emotional complexity of the star parent creates indelible marks. Next, we examine Sean Connery, who created walls not of fear, but of unbending, icy strength. The wall that could not be climbed. Sean Connery's unbending strength. He was, for millions around the globe, the ultimate man, confident, effortlessly charming, and seemingly indestructible. Sean Connery defined the legendary secret agent with an unassailable strength. Yet, the rigid self-discipline that forged his iconic screen persona created an emotional wall at home, one that his son, Jason Connery, found tragically impossible to climb. Sean Connery's path to stardom was one of fierce self-determination. He brought this intense conviction to his private life, believing that emotional strength was synonymous with distance, and that discipline was a genuine substitute for paternal warmth. To him, weakness was intolerable. Jason Connery grew up in the shadow of this towering figure. When the son attempted to follow in his father's footsteps, Sean Connery responded with a harsh dismissal. He delivered a warning. "The world," he stated, "doesn't owe anyone success." This rejection was more than criticism. It was a deeply personal invalidation. The father believed he was teaching strength, but what Jason received was distance. The expectation of flawless performance left no space for vulnerability. Which Hollywood idol's secret surprised you most? Share your thoughts below. Their relationship fractured for decades, separating two proud, profoundly private men, both too stubborn to yield to the simple, unifying power of an "I miss you." His face was known globally, yet he could not utter those three simple, life-affirming words to his son. The distance became a permanent fixture. Even heroes, it seems, could fail the people who revered them the most. His life proved that the great strength that builds legends can, simultaneously, break the bonds of family. The walls of emotional armor may protect the star from the world, but they tragically imprison the ones who love them. The pursuit of professional perfection often comes at the direct expense of a child's well-being. Next, we examine Lucille Ball, whose boundless energy made America laugh, but whose own children grew up terrified of disappointing the woman who expected her home to be as flawless as her studio set. The Tyranny of the Queen. Lucille Ball's flawless stage. She was the queen of comedy, a trailblazer whose infectious laughter made America adore her. Lucille Ball built an empire on the joy of the ridiculous. Yet, behind the studio doors, she ran her own home, not like a sanctuary, but like a precisely managed, flawless studio set. Lucille Ball was an uncompromising perfectionist. The tireless drive that ensured the enduring quality of her work was applied with equal rigidity to her personal life. The comedy she created on screen was a spectacle of mishaps, but in her home there was no room for error. Her children, Lucy Arnaz and Desi Arnaz Jr., grew up navigating the demanding expectation of a woman who placed professional excellence above all else. Her daughter, Lucy Arnaz, summarized the dynamic. Her mother was a perfectionist first, a mother second. Lucille wanted every aspect of her life to be impeccable. Mistakes were met with a chilling withdrawal of affection that signaled profound disappointment. Lucille Ball was not a mother of overt rage. Her cruelty was of a quieter, more insidious kind, the tyranny of impossible standards. The withdrawal was colder than any winter in California, a silence more deafening than the raucous laughter on her show. Her children grew up constantly afraid of disappointing the woman who made the whole nation laugh. They learned that the surest way to receive their mother's approval was to be flawless. Her legacy as a comedic genius remains eternal. But for her children, the memory is more complex. They recall a woman who struggled profoundly to take off the mask of the performer, even in the privacy of her own home. The weight of genius often comes with personal demons. Next, we examine Peter Sellers, whose brilliant mind was marred by intense volatility. Brilliance without empathy. Peter Sellers's love as a weapon. He was a comedic chameleon, a genius capable of disappearing into any role. Peter Sellers's artistry was unparalleled. Yet this mercurial brilliance was tragically intertwined with deep paranoia, violent mood swings, and a consuming insecurity that turned his capacity for love into a devastating, unpredictable weapon. Sellers's internal life was a continuous storm. He approached relationships not as genuine partnerships, but as emotional performances, demanding constant, unwavering adoration. When his need for validation went unmet, he would turn instantly and viciously on his loved ones, punishing them. His daughter, Victoria Sellers, later recounted the terrifying volatility of his personality. He could switch, in the blink of an eye, from seeking her adoration to accusing her of deep betrayal, only to follow the outburst with tearful apologies moments later. This extreme emotional whiplash made love in his presence feel perpetually conditional and unsafe, and instilled the impossible confusion of never knowing which version of their father would appear. Peter Sellers's genius was tragically unmatched by an ability for empathy. He could understand the mechanism of comedy, but he could not connect with the real, vulnerable feelings of the people who shared his home. He craved affection, but continually destroyed the bonds that offered it. Don't miss a single untold story from Hollywood's golden years. Subscribe now and join our journey. In his final years, there were attempts at reconciliation, a desperate effort by the famed actor to find peace with his children. But time ran out. His children have since spent decades trying to separate the legendary, brilliant man from the deeply flawed and emotionally hurtful father. Peter Sellers provides a somber study of how extraordinary artistic genius can transform into a profound personal cruelty. It is a cautionary tale that proves the spotlight cannot heal the soul. But as the golden age recedes into history, we must ask if the fundamental family tragedies of fame have truly faded. Next, we examine the final, sobering chapter, exploring the modern echo of Hollywood's worst parenting. The modern echo, when the camera replaces care. As the velvet curtain descends on the golden age, a fundamental, troubling question remains. Have the lessons of emotional exploitation and parental ambition truly been learned? We often choose to believe that with modern awareness, the cycle of trauma has been broken. Yet, a closer look at the contemporary world reveals a sober truth. The same pathology of fame endures, having simply traded the studio soundstage for the unforgiving glow of the digital screen. Today, the relentless hunger for attention that plagued previous stars has found a new, more pervasive channel: social media and digital content. The desperate pursuit of fame through a child has become frighteningly commonplace. Parents across the new media landscape are now openly chasing celebrity and wealth by turning every private moment of their children's lives into public, profitable content. The familiar, damaging patterns are now readily visible in the form of reality television families and influencer dynasties. The financial incentive is immense, but the core psychological cost remains identical to the trauma endured by Judy Garland and Tatum O'Neal. Childhood is sacrificed for the sake of the audience's gaze. In the end, Hollywood's shine may fade, but its emotional scars remain, echoing across the decades. For the children of the stars, past and present, the price of that eternal spotlight was too often the peace of their own home. It is a legacy that urges us to remember that the most beautiful, enduring stories are those built not on fame, but on unconditional love. If you found yourself captivated by these heartbreaking revelations, please take a moment now to like this video. It's the best way to support more deep dives into Hollywood history. And be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another untold story from the age of glamour and shadows.